Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. The subject for our discussion today, this morning, is From Transcendentalism to Vedanta, America's Quest for Truth. In fact, the very fact that I'm standing here in front of you discussing philosophy and spirituality is thanks to this transcendentalist movement. According to historians, including Dr. Barrows, who wrote the well-known volumes, the Proceedings of the Parliament, the first Parliament of World Religion, 1893. The first Parliament of World Religions in 1893, Chicago, would not have happened but for this transcendentalist movement in America. Because long before the arrival of Hindu, Buddhist, or any kind of European spiritual mystical traditions, the great transcendentalists, those who belong to the first phase of transcendentalism, and also those who belong to the second wave, they have paved the road to the emergence of new spiritual religious movements in America. And they have prepared the ground for accepting and welcoming new spiritual ideas and new reformist ideas within Christian Church. See, Theosophical movement, and of course the Unitarian traditions, which in a way influenced the emergence of Transcendentalism, the 19th century European Romanticism. All this must have influenced, but for the great work done by Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, and others, America would not have included a session for discussing the religious ideas of different religious traditions as part of their 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of the continent. The very idea of welcoming or inviting delegates from across the globe representing different religious faith systems other than Christianity, and then bringing them all in a single platform and discussing the commonalities, the common universal spiritual teachings of different holy scriptures. This very idea would not have been possible but for the great work of the great transcendentalists. This is the historical background. Then we may ask the question, what happened later? I will come to that in course of time, but at the very beginning I would say, in Western world, paradigms keep changing very fast. Frequently, there is no tendency to look back to the past and revive it, because the obsession with novelty, obsession with something new, if something is new, it should be very remarkable, this idea. In a way, this is in total contrast to the archetypal Oriental approach. Anything that is old must be great. Anything that's new is some kind of an upstartism. So you find these contrasting approaches in the West and also in the East. Of course, those lines do not exist anymore. Of course, I'm speaking more or less in the more traditional way of interpreting history and philosophy. But what I mean to say, to give an example, that will drive home the point. In Indian tradition, which in a way is common to most of the Oriental traditions, there is an emphasis on the traditional the old, the beaten track, the hierarchical. Well, there is a verse in one of Kalidasa's greatest dramas, which is Malaviga Agnimitram. Puranamityevana sadhu sarvam, nachapi kavim navamityavadyam, santa pariksha anyatarat bhajandi, mudha paraprateneya buddhi. You'll be surprised. This comes from Kalidasa's famous play. It's called Malaviga Agnimitram. Malaviga is the heroine and Agnimitra is a king, is a hero. It is a play somewhere in the 2nd century AD. The greatest of Sanskrit dramatists and playwriters, and also one of the greatest of Sanskrit poets, whose works were being translated into European languages right from 18th century onwards. So the meaning is this, is a rebuke to this hierarchical tradition. So one of Sanskrit commentators called Sanjeevani Vyakhyana, there is a commentary. So there it says, Puranamityevana sadhu sarvam. Don't think something is great or something wonderful because it is ancient, it is traditional. Nachapi gavim navamityavadyam. And don't think that it's something new, so it is to be discarded. The wise persons examines everything and then accepts what is to be accepted and rejects what is to be rejected. So this is a rebuke of the old Oriental way of looking at things. Anything that is old should be upheld, should be respected and revered just because it is old. And anything that is new should be discarded because it is just some kind of an upstart movement. Now, in the Western tradition, especially in the new continent, the other approach was more prominent. Anything that is new should be wonderful. Anything that is old should be, well, that's why, very often you find old people are prone to become depressed because they're afraid of being discarded because they're old. So you find this emphasis on novelty and youth, anything that is new in the Western Hemisphere, and emphasis on something old in the Eastern Hemisphere. Of course, these views, this analysis may not be any longer valid because the lines of demarcations have long vanished. The world has become practically one. But still, I was just referring to these two approaches. Now, in America, what happened, this is my view, the two world wars, the First World War and Second World War, and then the post-war developments, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, actually took America away from the influence of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, and others. So connecting back to Europe, we remember Emerson said, Emerson was so abhorrent of what he called the transatlantic, the old European ways. So he was very critical of the hierarchical, the rigid, conformist religious paradigms that influenced Europe, that dominated and defined European culture. Actually, his movement was in a way kind of revolt against the old European nationalism and rigid emphasis on conformity and conventions. So that's why he strongly criticized, he was abhorrent of this ancient European culture. If he actually meant, he put in so many words. But then what happened, the two world wars brought America into contact with not the best of Europe frequently, but the imperial, the political ambitions of traditional European national culture. The war between Prussia and France, and the rivalry between Britain and France, and the rivalry between Poland and Russia, which all went on for centuries. So these age-old rivalries, which have practically died out in Europe more or less after Second World War. Now, America put it on its shoulders, the mantle of European imperialism, and what happened? It moved far away from the, you may call it utopian naturalism of Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman, and went back to the old European imperialism. That's why today you don't find people growing beard and looking for something so higher meaning in the mystery of nature. Rather, they go outside America. They go somewhere else in search of Oriental wisdom. Because Emerson's greatness was he found out this mystical tradition within America itself. So I shall come to that. So what I mean to say, the quest for truth in America begins with the landing of maybe the second settlement of European settlers that in 1620 with the English settlers of Plymouth, who established a colony in 1620. So that's the real beginning of America's quest for truth. And then the idea that political freedom, social freedom, economic freedom is not enough. There should be a higher meaning for freedom, spiritual freedom. So the quest for spiritual freedom, that was a natural product of political, social and economic freedom when they reached the highest level. So that's what you find as a background which gave birth to innumerable reformist movements in 19th century America, like the Christian movements, the American Unitarian Association, the Mormonism, spiritualism, 1840s, then Theosophical Society, which was actually founded in Europe. Sorry, it ideas emerged in Europe, but it was founded in New York actually. And then Christian Science movement, faith healing, and all these different reformist movements were the byproduct. They in a way can be called the byproduct of this natural quest for higher freedom, spiritual freedom. So, and again, this would not have been possible in a traditional conservative society of Europe or Asia, because the willingness and the courage to move away from an established conformist social paradigm and look for something new is possible only in a new society, a new continent. So those who came to this country to practice freedom of religious faith naturally looked for something that is universal. So when you move away from a very conservative paradigm, from a very conservative way of life, and come to a new continent, a vast continent with not much population, which is not thickly populated, with enormous resources, forests and meadows and valleys, waterfalls, nature in its most sublime and grand manifestation, you find naturally there's a natural urge for our expansion. That's why Emerson, Thoreau, and all these great transcendentalists, they look to nature. They did not preach any kind of formal traditional religious ritual. So Emerson said, nature is the most sublime manifestation of the transcendental. Well, those of you or those of us who may think this is a new approach will be struck by the similarity of the ancient Vedic tradition. Nature in its sublime purity and sublimity, in its grandeur, is the greatest manifestation of the transcendental divine. That's why Emerson said there's a divine truth, a divine spark in all of us. I can quote one verse from Yajurveda. It is an interesting hymn which invokes peace, beauty, sublimity, grandeur, and blissfulness everywhere in nature. Om Dyav Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Rapas Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shanti Reva Shanti Sama Shanti Redhi. The meaning is, let there be peace in heaven, let there be peace on earth, peace in the sky, in waters, mountains, and valleys, in herbs and trees. May all dwellers everywhere be in perpetual peace. Let them all connect with the immanent divine spark within each of them. According to Emerson, in a society and organized religions constitute a kind of prison. He did not approve of the traditional conservative approach to God and religion, where a large number of people go to a place of worship, maybe a temple or a church or whatever may be, a structure. We go and meditate on one day and pray to one invisible monotheistic anthropomorphic God, and then do or live as they want for the next 6 days, again going back after 1 week. Now, in the Yajurveda Samhita itself, there is a similar episode. There's a dialogue between a teacher and his son, who is also his disciple. Those of you who may have read about Thoreau's great fascination for Bhagavad Gita may be struck by this, So he says, Thoreau says, every man is a builder of a temple called his body to the God he worships after a style purely his own, nor can he get off by hammering marble instead. We are all sculptors and painters, and our material is our own flesh and blood and bones. Any nobleness begins at once to refine a man's features, any meanness or sensuality to imbrue them. Now, coming back to this episode in the Yajurveda, the son puts one question to his father, who is his teacher. Adhihi bhagavo brahma iti. Adhihi bhagavo brahma. This is a question. Teach me the truth of Brahma. Remember, Emerson also uses the word Brahma, B-R-A-H-M-A is the spelling. But the modern spelling is B-R-A-H-M-A-N, Brahman. Brahma is a kind of anthropomorphic god in Hindu tradition, one of the trinities of monotheistic Hinduism. Brahman is the transcendental reality, and it is this idea of a transcendental, universal, immanent, divine reality that Emerson had in mind when he wrote his poem, Brahma. So the spelling is frequently, of course, in those days, these demarcations were not very clear. P-R-A-H-M-A. Actually, what he meant was B-R-A-H-M-A-N. It's Brahman. Brahman means one universal, transcendental, immanent, all-pervading divine reality, which is beyond words, beyond attributes, which is impersonal, which is universal. Now, this was the question that the child puts to his father. Adhihi bhagavo brahma iti. Now, in answer to this, the father tells the child, you go to forests. You observe the trees and mountains and valleys, the space, the clouds, and think the mystery behind them. Annam pranam chakshusrotram mano vachamiti etova imani bhudani jayante yena jatani jivanti yet prayanti abhisampishanti. This is the answer the father gave. You go around and find out anna means matter, material things, including nature. When you look at a tree or a beautiful plant, you can observe and analyze it as a botanist or also a woodcutter or somebody is out to gather firewood. How you interpret. But a mystic armed with this transcendental approach may see a deeper meaning and beauty in a plant, in the forest, in the clouds or the sky. I may ask the question, what's the mystery behind it? When you put a seed in a fertile soil, it sprouts, becomes a plant, it becomes a tree bearing fruits. Why does it happen? What's the mystery behind? You find out this mystery. That's the answer given by Father. Annam pranam chakshusrotram mano vachamiti. You look at the whole mystery of nature. Trees and mountains and valleys. And then find out the mystery behind. Tapasam brahma vidijñāsasva. Do tapa. And so through the practice of tapas, tapas actually means withdrawing our senses from external objects, drawing them inward, looking for a higher meaning, using our own mind through introspection, through meditation. So you find these speculations going on in Walden, the well-known book, Thoreau's Walden, as he moves from place to place. So, there's an interesting statement in Walden's book. See, he says, in the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. You find him not quoting but taking expressions from the word, Anna bhavanti bhudani parjanyad anna sampavaka yakyad bhavati parjanyo yaknya karma samudbhavaka karma brahmo bhavam vidhi brahmarpana samudbhavam, etc. I mean, he sees and he connects with an inherent rhythm, a string of interconnectedness, interrelatedness behind the entire universal existence. So, in this I am quoting actually from Walden. The book he named for the pond in Concord where Thoreau lived from 1845 to 1847. And there he expresses his profound reverence for Gita. And there he says, in the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, since whose composition years of the gods have elapsed, and in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial. And I doubt if that philosophy is not to be referred to a previous state of existence, so remote is its sublimity from our conceptions. I lay down my book and go to my well for water. Lo, and there I meet the servant of the Brahmin, the priest of Brahma, Vishnu and Indra, who still sits in his temple on the Ganges reading the Vedas, or dwells at the root of a tree with its crust and water jug. I had made this servant come to draw water for his master, and our buckets, as it were, create together in the same well. The pure Walden water is mingled with the sacred waters of the Ganges. So you can see this at a higher transcendental level. The teacher teaches his son, his disciple. It's called Bhrigu. That particular episode is called, it is called Bhrigurvai Varuni. It's called Varuni Vidya. When you sit on the banks of a pond and when you look at the water, not as something that will quench your thirst, but water itself signifies something sublime and grand. It points its finger to something beyond itself. The beauty, the charm, the grandeur of natural phenomena points to something transcendental. So in the Gita, this transcendental reality is explained as some kind of a interrelatedness. Annar bhavanti bhudani parjanyadanna sambhavaha. Yajnat bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samudbhavaha. So the waters of the rivers empty into an ocean, and that water is again absorbed by sun rays and they become clouds and they come back again as rainwater, and it fills the rivers, flows to the ocean, and again the cycle repeats. In the process, we all use it for quenching our thirst, for irrigation, for producing food crops. So there's an inherent rhythm of beauty and sublimity behind nature. So again he offers a commentary on the Gita in his major effort. A week under Concord and Merrimack rivers in the chapter Monday, he says, the wisest conservatism is that of the Hindus. Immemorial custom is transcendent law, says Manu. He refers to Manu. Manu was an ancient lawgiver. How in the middle of 19th century, long before the translations of, English translations of the ancient books of Hindu tradition, Vedantic tradition, had become popular, long before they became popular, how Thoreau could read anything about Manu itself is a mystery. And that is the custom of the gods before men used it. So he finds in Manu's law a kind of eternal law based on karma theory. Conscience is the chief of conservatives. Perform the settled function, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Action is preferable to inaction. So all these great ideas you find in the middle of 19th century, flourishing in American intellectual landscape. The journey of thy mortal frame may not succeed from inaction. A man's own calling with all its fruits ought not to be forsaken. Every undertaking is involved in his faults as the fire is in his smoke. Every karma by itself is imperfect, a central teaching of Gita. Dhumena avriyade vanni edadarso malena cha. You find, if there is fire, there is an enveloping smoke around. Also, if there is a mirror, there could be a stain on it. Similarly, every activity contains in it an inherent drawback, a defect. But that activity becomes a sublime worship of the transcendental reality when done with total unselfishness or freedom from any selfish motive. So you find him quoting, the man who is acquainted with the whole world should not drive those from their works who are slow of comprehension and less experienced than himself. Na buddhi vedam jineyeda jnanam karma sanginam yoshe sarva karmani vidwan yukta samachara. Well, you may perhaps imagine that I am imposing Gita on Thoreau. Actually, Thoreau's understanding of Gita was much more profound and much more accurate, spiritually accurate, than the translations of many of the great scholars of Europe. Because there is a fundamental difference between the way America responded to Oriental wisdom and Europe did. America is unique in it that it responded to Oriental wisdom at the emotional level. Now, mind catches something that intellect may miss. America did not produce great scholars and Oriental philologists and philosophers like Max Muller, Colebrook, Wiedenitz, Keith, MacDonald, and several others. You cannot, Paul Deussen. but nor did Europe produce an Emerson. So you find in Emerson's writings, in Thoreau's writings, a much more accurate, a spiritually much more accurate understanding and comprehension of the inner meaning of these great spiritual literature than you ever find in anything. You can compare Thoreau's or Emerson's views on Vedanta or Gita with those of Paul Deussen. The one understands with his intellect, the other understands with his mind. And when the mind is pure, through comprehension and meditation, it alone can, or it captures the true meaning of great spiritual words and expressions much more accurately than any scholarly intellect ever can. So that's what he says. Many of the higher ideas of karma yoga, which you find in the Gita, are put in simple language by these great transcendentalists. So that's why references to the Gita are found in Emerson journals and letters. Mostly he quotes from the 1785 translation of Gita by Charles Wilkins, who translated that work into English at the request of Warren Hastings, who was the first Governor General of Bengal, after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. So this is what Thoreau had to say about Gita. I owed my friend and I owed a magnificent date to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first book of books. It was as if an empire spoke to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent. The voice of an old intelligence which in another age and another climate had pondered and has disposed with the same question which exercises. The question we are asking today in middle 19th century were answered in the ancient book of Bhagavad Gita. So I'm coming to that again, You find a much more profound and open understanding of Gita in the writings of Emerson and Thoreau. Of course, the most visible influence of Gita you find in Brahma itself. Brahma itself is, at least the first of the four verses is a translation of Yenam Vyethandaram Yachenam Manyedekadam Ubhau Tau Navijanido Nayam Kantina Hanyade. Of course, Emerson used the red slayer. The one who thinks that he kills or he destroys something doesn't know that he cannot and does not destroy anything, because nothing is essentially destroyed, because that reality is indestructible, the immortal. So the one who thinks that he is being destroyed, he destroys something, they do not know. Ubhau tau na vijanito. Both of them are ignorant of the true nature of the absolute reality. So, I was just giving some examples from these ancient books and their influence on these great transcendental philosophers. The influence of Thoreau and Emerson, much more than Emerson, Thoreau was the one who influenced Gandhi, for example. Gandhi's own translation of Bhagavad Gita, Anasakti Yoga, reflects many of the views of Thoreau on Gita. The saint may renounce action, but a soldier, the citizen, the practical man generally, they should renounce not action but its fruits. Karmanneva adhigarastai ma phaleshu gadachana. Na karma phala hedu bhuhu na te sangostu akarmani. You find this, there were not many Westerners, Western scholars, even European scholars, who could really understand the true meaning of this verse. And you find long before many of these translations were published, the actual meaning of Karma Yoga, the very dynamics of Swadharma and Karma Yoga, you find in the writings of Thoreau. It is really, for me as a student of scriptures, right from my early childhood, it is a surprise to me. See, karmani evate adhikaraha. You have the right only to work. Na phaleshu kadachana. You have no right for the results of the work. Na karma phala heturbhuku. You should not be the cause of the effect of karma. Na te sangustu akarmani, and you should not be attached to inaction. Now, this has been very grossly and tragically distorted and misrepresented by many scholars in India also, of course. Oh, Krishna tells you, you should work hard. You should not ask for a paycheck. You should not go for salary. So, it has been ridiculed, this idea, because it was not properly understood. Thoreau, in his writings involved in referring to this, he says, the saint may renounce action, but the soldier, the citizen, the practical man, generally they should renounce not action, but its fruits. It's wrong for them to be idle. Mate sangostu akarmani, you should not be attached to akarma, inaction. It's wrong for them to be idle. It's equally wrong to desire reward or industry. It's wrong to shirk destroying civilization and once for all. No, coming to the subject, I want to, this interesting aspect, I want to elaborate a little further. Now, how do you really practice Swadharma and Karma Yoga? From a purely psychological point of view, is it possible for us to renounce desires, plan? Whenever we take up any work, we will have some plan in mind, some idea how it should be done, and what would be the anticipated result. If you ask a student who is working hard for getting a high grade in the examination, you ask him to do his work, studying books, preparing for examination without a definite motive, his mind may go blank. An executive who is preparing his future responsibilities, mind may go blank. Thoreau brings out the idea that's found in the Gita. In fact, Gandhi brings it out. Surprisingly, you find this Thoreau for the first time out in English. He says, really speaking, we have no control over the results of what we are doing. It's a fact. It is a psychological fact. There is, you see, for example, there is always an unknown, unpredictable element in the result of whatever we do. You may do a work. In a laboratory, if you put some chemicals together in identical conditions, you may have identical results. But in real life, that logic doesn't function. In real life, 2 plus 2 is not always 4. It could be anything. You may go on working hard for a definite purpose to do something, but result need not always be the same. Another person may do the same thing, result be different in life, not in laboratory. So there is always an unpredictable, unknown, uncontrollable element that you cannot predetermine when it comes to the result of the work. So if you always link our work to a definite result, anticipated result, we are doomed for disappointment. So that's why you find this idea. So he says, Lord Krishna's teaching has been captured in such an accurate language, That's why Thoreau was impressed by Lord Krishna's critique of inaction, And he says, Krishna insisted that it is impossible for you to remain inactive mentally and physically simultaneously all the time. Nahi kasikshanam abhi jadadishtati akarma kirda kairidehi avasya karma sarva pragriti gunaihi. If you don't practice karma yoga, your fate will catch you by the throat and force you to practice karma yoga. But you do things and you get the opposite result. So you suddenly understand, well, I cannot always be sure of what I'm going to do. So you are forced to admit the unpredictability of the result. The result is not in your hands. So that's why he was highly impressed by this critique of karma yoga in the Gita. And now, not a philologist like Max Muller or Dewson, and he did not know, at least there is no evidence to prove that he knew enough Sanskrit to read the commentaries of the Gita, not even Emerson didn't. Have you had a copy from Carlyle. Emerson got his copy from Carlyle, which he made use of for writing in journals and during his lectures. Now, here Thoreau captures this idea of Karma Yoga, and he finds that Gandhi was highly influenced. He expresses his indebtedness to these great thinkers. Thoreau is one, John Ruskin another one, Tolstoy. Some of these Western scholars, Western thinkers who were impressed by the spiritual current of the Gita without really knowing the Sanskrit language in which these ideas were put by Vyasa in the text. So Gandhi was highly impressed. Gandhi himself was not a Sanskrit scholar. He himself admits that. That's why Thoreau says, Arjuna has an instinctive recognition for war. That's the chief reason why war is chosen as an example of the most repellent kind of duty. So again, while describing the psychological dynamics of Karma Yoga and Swatharma in the Gita, you find, he says Arjuna didn't want to do what he was expected to do. But the greatness of Krishna was, Krishna could convince Arjuna of the wisdom of doing the unpleasant duty, which is a very big challenge even in modern times. How to do your unpleasant duty. So, if that duty is taken up as something other than just a duty of work, as a yajna, the word yajna is not used by Thoreau, but you find this unselfish action, action as a worship of the transcendental divine, and you find such expression, yajna, the word is used here in the Gita. So, that's why he says every man is a builder of a temple called his body to the God he worships. So, you find another approach to the whole dynamics of the cyclic rotation of human life. To the God he worships after a style purely his own, nor can he get off by hammering marble instead. So every human being is born with a definite programmed samskaras, vasanas and vrittis. And we act, think and speak according to the influence of the samskaras that we have inherited from previous life circles. So once we realize this, it is possible for us to look upon our duty as something other than duty. It is a natural way of our responding to the nature. And for Emerson, nature was the most sacred thing. So we are part of the nature. That's why he was so strongly critical of the tools of production, the tools of modern science and technology, which he considered to be an intrusion, a prison wall, an unnecessary distraction that takes us away from our own true nature. This you find in the writings and in the speeches of Emerson and also Thoreau. One may discover the root of a Hindu religion in his own private history. That's again Emerson. This is Emerson writing in journal. One may discover the root of a Hindu religion in his own private history when in the silent intervals of the day and night he does sometimes inflict on himself like austerities with stern satisfaction. The word Hindu religion is used, but you should perhaps put it Vedantic in a different sense, because unfortunately, from 1970s onwards, intellectuals in America had come to associate the word Hinduism exclusively with the external rituals like building temples, pujas, all these external rituals. Surprisingly, before 1970s and 60s, Hinduism was pursued more like a Vedanta. So even the writings of Thoreau and Emerson, you don't find the word Vedanta, because Vedanta as a word became well known only after Swami Vivekananda's advent in America in 1893. Before that, Hindu or Hinduism That was the word frequently used. That's a word used by Schopenhauer, Hendrik, Max Muller, Paul Deussen, all the European Indologists used the word more or less, the word Hinduism. Aquitin Duperot, who translated many of these Sanskrit books into Latin and which later came to be translated into English and German. So the word Hinduism or Hindu were more popular. So he says, in the sense of Vedanta, one may discover the root of a Hindu religion in his own private history. In your own life, every spiritual seeker will find in his own spiritual evolution little bit of Vedanta. That's what he implies. Because Vedanta in a way signifies the natural evolution of the human quest for higher spiritual realization. So Vedanta in the broader sense is not the cult of a particular community or a particular religious group. It in a way, it represents the natural instinctive spiritual evolution of the human mind in all traditions. To give an example, I already quoted the Yajurveda episode, Varuni Vidya. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there are some other interesting discussions. Eda Siva Aksharasya Prashasane Gargi Surya Chandramaso Vidhado Dushtadaha. You find Yajnavalkya is a great philosopher, debates with Gargi, a woman philosopher in ancient India. He says all these trees, mountains and valleys, suns and moons and stars, they're all kept in a disciplined order. Everything. So if you cut down trees, there'll be no rains and there'll be famine. Human life will suffer. Or if you burn too much of all these, the global warming, there'll be floods, there'll be destruction. Maybe the whole globe may get submerged. So if you do something that violates the inherent rhythm, an inherent sequence of interrelatedness, the mutual link is a violence against our own nature, is adharma. So this idea of the inherent interrelatedness is universal. Now this is found in the Vedic literature, which is naturally part of Hindu tradition, but that aspect of Hindu tradition is universal. It happens to every person. Similarly, in our private life, when we do certain things, it violates our natural, inherent life pattern. It violates, it puts an imbalance in our own natural rhythm. That's why one may discover the root of a Hindu religion in his own private history. What does it mean? If you look into your own inner life, you will connect with many of these great Vedantic ideas explained in the Upanishads. But the word Hindu religion is used, perhaps in modern times, it would be better to put Vedantic or universal spiritual truth. That would be a better expression. When in the silent intervals of the day and night, he does sometimes inflict on himself like austerities with stern satisfaction. Which, if you go to your room, sit quiet and close your eyes, without thinking of a intimidating supervisor sitting above the clouds in the form of an anthropomorphic god, but if you turn your attention inward and look for the higher meaning in our own life or our own actions, thoughts, and also higher meaning for the natural phenomena, you will connect with this essence of spiritual rhythm, interrelatedness. So that's why in Walden he emphatically states, my purpose in going to Walden Pond was not to live cheaply, not to live dearly, but to transact some private business with the fewest obstacles. So Walden was a kind of spiritual retreat for him. Free in this world as the birds in the air, disengaged from every kind of change, those who practice the yoga gather in Brahman certain fruits of their actions. So many of these words you find in the writings of the great transcendentalists. So, well, my own understanding and my own efforts have taken me little into these great philosophical treasures of America, is that the happenings, the unfortunate happenings of the 20th century, the two world wars, and then connecting with the European imperialist trends, perhaps took away or weakened the influence of these great thinkers. If you look at the writings of a man like Emerson or Thoreau, you find ideas which are very similar to the writings of the great sages of Vedic times in India. Very often you find not that they borrow something from the other. Of course, Gita had its influence on both Thoreau and also with Whitman, and much more, of course, on Emerson. But what I mean to say, great minds, when they look for higher truths in their own private life, as Thoreau stated just now, will connect with these great universal spiritual ideas, which is part of our civilization, our common spiritual heritage. So, incidentally, what happened today is, from Emerson's times, 1803, that's the year in he was born, to our own times, you find this quest going on. But today, you find there's a tendency among many seekers and spiritual aspirants to go for something universal, something transcendental, something big and broad, something that doesn't ask you to believe blindly. You cannot go to any place, place where people are educated and civilized, and you can tell them, well, our religion is the only true religion, their religion is bad. You can't say that. So there is a gradual evolution that was happening right from Emerson's time onwards. We resulted in the first Parliament of World Religion, which incidentally, if you look at the history of Parliament of Religions, interfaith traditions, you find this is third in the history of the world. The first one was in somewhere the 3rd century BC, when Ashoka the Great Buddhist emperor in India, convened. He brought on the same platform the delegates and representatives of all the world religions existing at that time, mostly different religious traditions of Indian subcontinent. That was in 3rd century BC. The second attempt historically was in 1566-67, when another Indian emperor, Akbar the Great, tried to put together or maybe bring on the same platform representatives and delegates of different religious traditions, Christianity, which had already come to India much earlier, and Sufism and Buddhism and so on. But these two attempts did not really take off. But the third attempt, it happened in this country. And that's the glory of the United States. That is 1893. As part of the 400th anniversary celebrations of Columbus' discovery of the United States, the new continent, there was a Parliament of World Religion in which Swami Vivekananda came. He came as an unknown representative, but he became a celebrity because he spoke not about one religion or one cult. He spoke about the universal spiritual heritage, which he designated as Vedanta, which is the essence of the writings at the end of the Vedic spiritual tradition called Upanishads. Now, Thoreau and Emerson must have come in contact with many of these ideas, because the Upanishads translations, which happened the early part of 19th century, had already become popular among the intellectual elite of America at that time. So you find that broadening, the universalizing impact of the great transcendentalist scholars who made possible for America to hold the first Parliament of World Religion, which formally brought Vedantic heritage to America. And that's why we are all now celebrating So I just tried to give just a brief interpretation of my own understanding. But many of these great Vedic statements, which I already quoted earlier, will be very similar to the ideas expressed in Walden. See, for example, sweetly blow the winds. You find Emerson Thoreau especially talking about waterfalls, skies, the pure nature, getting back to nature. Ideas like the science and technology, the tools of science and technology are so many distractions. They take us away from our true nature, and they give an artificial face to ours, to our face, the artificial color to our face. So, Madhuvata Rudayati Madhuksharanti Sindhavaha Madhvi inna santoshadhihi. So you find, let the winds blow sweetly, the streams, waters, skies. Madhumakta nujosasi madhumarparthivagam rajaha madhudyaurastuna pita madhumano vanaspadir madhumanastu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantunaha. So oshadhi, vanaspati, big trees, herbs, plants, sky, mountains, valleys, let them all be in a state of inherent blessedness. So throughout Emerson's works and Thoreau's works, you find this quest for going to nature, going back to nature. So first we communicate with the external nature, and that contact with the sublime beauty of nature outside will naturally take us inward, will enable us to connect with our own nature within ourselves. So from external to internal, there is a gradual evolution from without to within, from many to one, from gross to subtle. So the American Transcendentalist movement represents a unique aspect of Vedanta. To my mind, it is actually a unique manifestation of Vedanta, as it would happen only a country like America, which is so free from all the old conservative traditional prison walls. That quest for freedom, maybe political freedom, economic freedom, social freedom, it all began with a quest for religious freedom, the early settlers who came to this country. But then it naturally and gradually evolved to a quest for higher freedom, spiritual freedom. Freedom not for the senses, but freedom from the tyranny of senses. So, and that is possible only by getting back to our own true nature. Nature has two aspects. One, what we see outside. If we can connect with the beauty, the charm and the grandeur of external phenomena, then we will be able to understand something transcendental about it, which is not visible outside. And that will help us to turn into our own true nature and connect with the divine spark present within all of us. There's a great work of these great thinkers. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.